Do you know what it means to be a motherless daughter? Did you know you can have mother loss without mother death? Mother loss comes in many forms, and Motherless Daughters Ministry is here to help you navigate through your particular mother loss. While you are unique, you are definitely not alone. We have 20 years worth of pearls of wisdom to help you on your mother loss journey, and we are sharing all of these pearls with you through this very podcast, Nurturing Words, Voices of Experience, sponsored lovingly by Motherless Daughters Ministry.
Hello, I'm Gladys Bell, your host. Today, we have a unique presentation in our series of interviews. We're sharing a recording of a live Facebook interview of author and coach Danyetta Najoli by our founder and board chair, Mary Ellen Collins. It is not very often that the subject of suicide has been the topic of discussion as we talk about motherless daughters. Danyetta gives us an up-close view of her experience and the impact of her grief journey. Let's listen in on this conversation.
I'm Mary Ellen Collins, and I'm the board chair of the Motherless Daughters Ministry. Our guest is Danyetta Najoli. We will be honored to really get into hearing her story and all that she has to share. So I am absolutely thrilled. Danyetta has been doing coaching for mother loss by suicide, and she has a link on our homepage if any of you want to reach out to her, or you can reach her at Danyetta at motherlessdaughtersministry.com. So, wow. We are so privileged and honored that Danyetta is willing to share her story, because this is very raw. And any of you who know someone who has had that experience of mother loss by suicide, or if you are a counselor or a therapist, you know how raw this is. So I invite Danyetta to take over. So first, Danyetta, would you tell us a little bit about your story?
Yes, well, I want to first thank you for having me on and for interviewing me during this process. Really, really honored, and I'm really prayerful that someone's life will be changed, even if it's one person. So my motherless daughter story, or my mother loss story, began in 1976. I'll always remember that ice cream cost 10 cents in 1976 because it was a hot day in August. In fact, it was August 21st, and I was 5 years old. My mom had just finished doing my hair. I had sat on a pillow on the floor, and she was on the sofa, and she told my two sisters and I, she actually told my two older sisters to look after me while they went out and play. And of course, they balked because they didn't want to have to watch their baby sister. I'm 5 and 6 years younger than them. And in fact, one of my sisters said, why can't she just stay with you? Talking to my mom. And I remember snapping back saying, I don't want to stay with mommy. I want to go outside and play, as a 5-year-old. So there we all went. We left my mother and my grandfather in the apartment. And the setting is Harlem. I should also say the setting is in Harlem as well. So the ice cream truck pulled up to the circle when we were outside playing, and we call what you would call a cul-de-sac in another part of the neighborhood, but this was really a dead end circle on our street. We were in the inner city. And so basically when the ice cream truck came, it was pretty much a call to the whole neighborhood to run upstairs and get your money, do what you can do to get some ice cream. So we lived on the 9th floor. My middle sister and I, rushed upstairs. Usually the elevator was broken, but this time I believe it did work. And we went up to our apartment, and, we couldn't wait to ask our mom for 10 cents to buy the ice cream. So we lived in an apartment building that was set up as a shotgun style apartment. So all the rooms were like back to back to back. As soon as you walk in, you start at the kitchen, and then the next room right away is the living room. And then our room was the second one. And my grandfather was laying on his bed in his room. And then after that was the bathroom. So we were looking for our mom. We were just crying out, like, Mommy, can we have some money for ice cream? We knew that she must have been in the bathroom because all the other rooms, she weren't there. So I just remember us knocking and excitedly asking for those 10 cents, while, trying to push through the door even. And because we didn't want the ice cream truck to leave, imagine that kind of period of time, you're rushing up the stairs trying to get there. And really, our faces were pressed against the door as we were asking. And I also remember how hard the door was to open. And I guess it didn't occur to us to wait to hear her response, even because we were just really wanting that ice cream. We were just kids wanting a sweet treat. So we finally was able to push through the door enough to see my mother with her eyes rolled back to the back of her head and her body just hanging over the toilet seat. The way it's set up in that apartment is that, well, she had taken a rope and tied it over the pipe from the apartment above us. The pipe was exposed from the other bathroom. Everything was painted, but that's just how it was set up. And so our calls for ice cream money quickly turned to screams and crying. My grandfather was roused out of his room and found us all there, and that's really all I remember from that day. And that's all I remember personally about my mom. So I really feel like my brain, the human brain, has protected me so that, I don't get so overwhelmed about what happened. Yeah. So,
It's very interesting though. You're the scenes. I could understand exactly. I was with you walking down that hallway. The scenes are fixated in your mind. And you're right, the brain does, your mind is protected. But the scenes, I went with you down the hallway. I went with you down the hallway. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I do, and it's been with me my whole life. I mean, that's the only day that I really remember about my mother, and it was crystal clear. I can't remember personally a day before that. And there were also stories about my mother being under medical treatment at the hospital for her clinical depression. She was being seen off and on. And I was also told that she tried to take my sisters and I with her when she contemplated suicide prior to that time. So I know for a fact that me sitting here today is definitely not by chance because, you do hear of stories where, parents, mothers, fathers, take their children too.
Well, let me ask you, as you look at it, what's the hardest part about coping with your mother's suicide?
For me, for many years, it was always the month of August that I had the hardest time coping in the past. Not on Mother's Day, but it was always August because that was not only her birthday, but her birthday was the 3rd of August and she passed away on the 21st. I went through all the emotions from, sadness to blame to shame and guilt and even anger. So you name it, I kind of went through all those different emotions and they were hard to go through, but mostly the sadness around that time in August. I remember belonging to a church in Tennessee, in Nashville, and, I couldn't function in August. I'm pretty functional and, type, I just like to get things done. But during the month of August, I just couldn't do anything. Practically, I would stay in bed, take time off, not go to church, which was important to me. That was a signal for me to know, oh, something is definitely different. And it wasn't until I sought Christ and counseling, that I began to realize I needed to work through those strong emotions that I just couldn't do on my own. Yeah. Okay. And also for me, the hardest thing about coping with my mother's suicide also was her absence through all of my major life events and experiences. You just long to have your mother with you to hear your fears and to celebrate your wins and witness the births of your children, all those things. Even, yeah.
Well, one of the questions I always wonder about is, how did your family or the people, your friends, people that were close to you, how did they react with your mother's passing? How did it affect your relationship?
Well, just coming from the time that it actually happened, I want to bring you right to that space because people in our building, we lived in, housing authority in the projects in Harlem, so people in our building in our neighborhood, they were pretty shocked by the news back then, of my mother's passing to suicide. And they had to come in and take her body, from our apartment. So that visual is something that people we knew probably still remember in their childhood, or in their younger years as a cemented
Mm-hmm.
image. Now, also my extended family, like my aunt, it's so funny. I have a very small family. I have one aunt on my father's side, and I have a couple of uncles, maybe about three uncles or so, but two in particular from my mother's side. And then we have I have two first cousins on either side. So it's kind of unusual to have a small family like that, but I do have a host of other cousins. But our extended family, like my aunt, my cousins, church family, from my mother's church and my grandparents' church, they all leaned into our family during that time. We were the ones who had the family tragedy, if you will, within our larger
Mm-hmm.
family. And they helped with things like the wake and the funeral. My godmother, in particular, Diane, came into my life when my other uncle introduced me to her. And she owned a dance studio in Harlem. And my grandfather encouraged me to take classes there. And that would most certainly become my what I would call dance therapy now, but we didn't call it that. It was just something that I did every Saturday to music
Yeah.
and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in my household, we never talked about my mother's passing. We never
Mm-hmm.
talked about it. And I think that's because, you
Mm-hmm.
know, because that was how I was raised. And, so I never questioned the fact that we didn't talk about it. I didn't
Right.
think it was unusual, and I'm not sure if it was because we were raised by, I was raised by my grandfather and my uncle, which is an unlikely pair, and they were men, so I don't know if that has something to do with why
Right.
we didn't
Right.
talk about it, but
Right.
but we, maybe not wanting to accept people's sympathy or what have you. I don't know, but I
Mm-hmm.
also felt like we were all in survival mode, living
Yes.
in the inner
Yeah.
city of
Yeah.
inner city of Harlem in a very
Right.
economically disinvested period in the 70s and 80s, dealing with trauma from my mother's death.
Right. 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 It all is just huge. It's absolutely huge. I'm interested around your friends or extended relationships. How did this affect that for you? How did your mother's suicide affect those relationships?
She had some really close friends. I mean, we had a cousin Priscilla was really good friends with my mom, and she, was hard on her. And then we also had another
Hmm.
family friend that lived in our building, and she was really good friends with my mom. And even to this day, like we reunited with her kids, which were around my age. And I really was wanting to know what it was like, to be my mom's like best friend. But she wasn't able to talk about it. Her daughter said it's just still so tender, so raw. She doesn't want to talk about it. So I have to respect the fact that even though I'm going through my own journey,
Hmm.
still seeking information, even to this point about my mom, like who she was as a person. I do hear stories, and I did hear so many stories from my uncles about who she was. But you know how you want to hear other examples. You just have to respect that people are in different places, and you just
Right.
have to get your healing the way that it comes for you.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Hmm.
the family poured in, the church was a big part of
Yeah.
it.
What's interesting is it doesn't make any difference what era we're in. It is always difficult for people to talk about when there's a loss. And if there's a loss by suicide, it is just very difficult. So they're really raw with their loss too. So it's really, you know, that's pretty common, but it is exaggerated with this type of loss as far as how they react to it. I've heard many women over the years say, we don't talk. We don't talk about it. Nobody mentions anything. So this then is exaggerated because of the trauma that happened in the family. So when I look at what you've gone through, what do you think's made the biggest impact in your healing and your journey, your grief journey?
I think for me, being the youngest actually made a big impact on my ability to heal and go as far as
Mm.
doing things like speaking about it and writing about my healing journey. I think because I was so young, it impacted me on some level, but it what my sisters were 5 and 6 years older, so they
Oh,
were
okay.
able they were impacted probably a little bit more greatly. But for me, the age difference actually was a big part of impacting me on my healing journey. If I were older, it might have been a little harder for me to heal and process my grief. Also, being willing to learn as much as I can about how to parent my children who are now
Yeah.
teens. It was so important for me after I became a mom to begin the healing process even more so because I didn't want to unknowingly pass on any trauma to my
Hmm.
own children. And, that's how I came across the
Hmm.
ministry, the Motherless Daughters Ministry, because I was at a conference, a women's conference, and a friend had hosted, and there was a table in the atrium about the ministry. And I thought, could this be right for me? Then when the journey retreat was being held in the spring of 2019, I was doing the research for this interview, and I was like, wow, the spring of 2019 was when I had gone to the journey retreat. And I said to my husband, I really want to attend this. And it was over a 4 and 5 day period. You had to pack up and move away for a little bit, unplug. But it really opened up so much for me, a sense of community, and it gave me much of the language that I needed to articulate what I had been experiencing for many, many years. So I stayed in, connection, obviously, with the organization, but also doing things like reading books and attending seminars to learn about why people complete a suicide. That was also important to me.
Right,
I'm just a
right,
learner, lifelong learner. So I
right.
really leaned into that, and that helped me eventually to
Hmm.
empathize with my mother for the first time.
Mm.
You know, and
Really?
I did that. Yeah, I did, and I read a book that my cousin gave me, my aunt's daughter. She gave me a book called "Yesterday I Cried" by Ian Van Sant, and
Mm.
it was it was such a breakthrough book for me because of the moment that I read it and during that time of my life, and the fact that the woman, Iyanla Van Sant, had gone
Hmm.
through the same thing during the same period of time. I mean, she had 3 kids. My mom had 3 kids. She was clinically depressed. My mother was clinically depressed, and she had contemplated suicide. And so it was the very first time I had put myself in my mother's position, like in her shoes, to even understand what she might have been going through.
Wow,
But it
wow.
was it was all helpful because you never know how healing takes place. So I pulled in so much from that.
Mm.
And there's a few other things too that helped me, finding creative ways to stay connected with my sisters and my uncle. We have this family call we've been doing since 2007 that I had initiated. I didn't want us to just get together, for a funeral or for some other event. Like everyone was already married and had kids. So, the only time we probably would get together would be maybe a family reunion, possibly. But
Hmm.
I wanted to connect that. And recently,
Hmm.
my husband and my 2 teens, we went to New York City this past April to see a premiere of my godmother's performance at the stages at the Apollo. Now, my godmother, like I
Wow,
said, yes, she
wow.
came into my life.
How
She
wonderful.
came in my life right at the time when my mother passed. I remember meeting her at the wake. And so this event at the stages of the Apollo was so important because this was 4 blocks from the Apollo Theater, and it was a beautiful convergence of
Hmm.
visiting with my 2 sisters and having my
Hmm.
uncle attend the performance with us. And to
Hmm.
top it all off, my godmother's performance was in the renovated theater where my grandfather worked for over 35
Hmm.
years.
Wow.
Plus I could see
So,
my mother's
yeah.
where she
Uh-huh.
used to work,
Yeah.
from the hotel room. So
Yeah.
God definitely winked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that was going to be my next question about how do you honor her memory? And these are beautiful examples of that. So, do you have any other ways that you found to honor her memory?
Yeah, I do try to create new memories, especially in the month of August on significant days that honor
Mm.
my mother's life. Because again, we want to be remembered by, not the worst thing that ever happened to us, right? We want to have other memories. And so I try to do things with my children and my husband, around that time,
Mm-hmm.
especially with that intention to say, I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
to myself, we're making a new memory. Sometimes I send a message to my sisters to acknowledge my mother's life at a certain period of time in
Okay.
August, and again, because August
Mm-hmm.
was the time that we had the hardest in terms of coping in the past, not on Mother's Day. And then also supporting others as a coach and a leader. I mean, I feel like that's a way that I can honor my mother. My
Yeah.
entire coaching and training practice is largely because I want to honor my mother.
Ah,
What she may not have been
that
able
is
to
wonderful.
articulate and communicate, I can help others,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, as we move forward in our questions, I'm going to ask you, as we age, do you find old wounds surface with a knowing clarity that calls for awareness and extra self-care?
Yes. I do find that things surface. Actually, when I was preparing for this interview, things surfaced around the stigma of suicide and how kids can be so cruel. Like I had never thought about the fact that kids were cruel at the time. Like, they would say things, mean things, and I'm not trying to say that I was an angel or exempt from also like getting right there with them, but the things that they would say would be about not having a mother. And so they must
Mm,
have known a couple of things as I look at it now, as I'm now 54. Wow. But what I look at is like, wow, they must know the powerful nature of a nurturing mother to say that in a fit of like trying to bully somebody to say, oh, that's why you don't
mm-hmm,
have a mother, and yeah, so things I think we get more clarity as we age, but it doesn't necessarily always follow. Like age is a number. I think it's about your ability to want to lean in to whatever you're learning, your own learning journey needs to be for yourself and to be open to it. Because, there are a lot of people that are older that may still be pushing back on growth around certain things and being able to
mm-hmm,
confront things because these are not easy things to confront. And that's why I say I respect those, even my family members that may not be, in a position to talk about certain things. I have to respect that because,
mm-hmm,
everyone's different. That's a
mm-hmm.
great question.
The other question is, when and where did you enter a space that made it okay for you to speak about your mom's death? How did you know it was a safe place?
Hmm. Oh, that's a good question. I think the moment that I realized it was when after I read that book yesterday, I cried. I actually did what the title said because it
Yeah.
was around my 25th, 26th birthday. I always tell people as I'm coaching in groups that I had a quarter life crisis because people were leaving in my space at that time. I had three major departures, and it made me think about the abandonment issue that I had never thought about until those three main things left me. And I was forced to, come to grips with that. And it was scary because I didn't know what to do. And that was when I had actually sought out the counseling too. And yeah, so when that was a real pivotal moment for me because I knew that I needed something bigger than myself, to help me through the moment.
Right.
Yeah. And I leaned in. I leaned in as much as I
Mm-hmm.
could. I saw it, like I said, with the counselor, it was really helpful because I was able to talk about what I was
Mm-hmm.
experiencing, even though I didn't quite know what it was, but
Mm-hmm.
we worked through it. Michelle was really great.
Okay. All right.
We're going to take a short break to share some information. Then we'll hear the rest of the interview.
Wherever you are on your journey of loss, the path to healing is ongoing. At Motherless Daughters Ministry, our services are designed for you and by women who are motherless daughters. Connect with a large community through our social media channels. Listen to the words of nurturing voices with our podcast and 4M4U YouTube videos. Consider one-on-one personal coaching for your independent needs, or come together with other women like you in our monthly support groups or annual 4-day small group retreat. If you are interested in helping other women like you, consider facilitator training with our Guiding Groups to Greatness program. Visit us at motherlessdaughtersministry.com for your healing or to be of a healing to others.
As you've worked with women in this arena where they've had mother loss by suicide, are there unique challenges that you found that these women have?
Yeah, I think that there are some unique challenges that some women have when they have lost by suicide. You know, the thing is that when this happens, it's you rarely find that it's someone else in your circle that you can go to. You know, you don't really have a lot of that happening and so you feel like, oh, I'm on my own, I'm alone, I have to
Mm-hmm.
go this alone, but you don't
Mm-hmm.
have to. And so, and it's also a topic that is considered taboo and stigmatized in our
Mm-hmm.
community. So it makes you feel more isolated, to even want to talk to someone. And so I think the tendency is for people to isolate, and not share.
Mm-hmm.
And that would
Okay.
be, and I think that's what
Mm-hmm.
happens a lot of times, because you don't really know
Mm-hmm.
who you can talk to about it.
Mm-hmm. As we were preparing for this, a memory came back to me that I knew, but wasn't in my forefront. Is that my mother's mother, my grandmother, committed suicide by the same method as by hanging herself. And what happened with my mother, she was blamed because she was the only one who was available to go back and take care of her depressed mother. And so she suffered a lot of blame from her other family members. So what I makes me think about blame in itself is uh, in your experience in working with women, blame, and are they blamed? Have you had experience, and what do you say with that?
I found that there are so many circumstances that led my mother to make the decision, to take her own life. But I personally don't land on blaming others.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that there can be lots of contributing factors, but
Mm-hmm.
ultimately it is the person's decision. And so I'm open to coaching more people who have had this situation and who is also caught in a cycle of blaming either themselves or others. And there's also a time when
Mm-hmm.
counseling is actually needed. And I want to be
Mm-hmm.
sensitive to that because again, a cycle of blame can
Mm.
also be a
Yeah.
reason that people might need to have counseling.
Well,
Yeah.
when the event is so traumatic, a lot of times people have to point fingers. So they may be pointing fingers at the daughter because they need to handle it. So they need to play it. There's a reason why. And, the reason why sometimes we'll never know. But it seems like that people like to look for placing blame. So I'm thinking that maybe that woman who has experienced, that daughter who has experienced the mother lost by suicide, has been blamed for her mother's suicide. That's, when the blame piece. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate when that happens because that's kind of a cousin to shame. When you feel blamed about something as
Mm-hmm.
so significant as that, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the trajectory of your life could actually change because
Mm-hmm.
you will feel that sense of shame and you might believe it. You might begin
Mm-hmm.
to believe that it's true. And that's why I go back to the community, the sense of community that is needed to come outside of just our own
Mm-hmm.
selves and to realize that it is a
Mm-hmm.
decision, it's an error, in someone's brain,
Mm-hmm.
just like
Mm-hmm.
a kidney has a condition or the heart has a condition. There's a critical error in the brain that says that this is a viable option. Yeah.
There's another question. Do you ever think about the pride your mother would have regarding who you are and the impact you have on the world?
You know, that's the thing that kind of propels me in the direction that I go in every day, to be
Mm-hmm.
really honest about it. Because I think about, like, what would she think? How big would her
Mm-hmm.
smile be? If you do things that honor those who have gone before you, you're thinking of that anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But in a sense, even more so with my mom, because she had completed the suicide, I had gone through the emotions of, am I enough? To anger, to blame, or blame to a certain degree, and feeling that sense of shame
Mm-hmm.
around
Mm-hmm.
the taboo nature of it, and not talking about it, putting the
Mm-hmm.
wall up. Because if you're not talking about it, then no one gets in. Definitely no one gets in when you have the wall up and you're not talking about it. But to be able to say in prayer and just in thoughtful reflection that she would be so proud right now. Her picture is right here, like not too far from where I'm sitting. And it's one of the few pictures I have it's a blurry shot that I got blown up of me sitting next to her, and she's kind of holding me. We're sitting on a bench, and it's just a
Oh,
loving moment. And
yeah.
so, yeah, yes, I do think about that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I think about like how she might
Mm-hmm.
respond to choices I've
Mm-hmm.
made. Yeah.
Back to thinking about some of the women that you have worked with. Have you had any experience where there has someone who's had survivor's guilt? Why was it? What far as why did they were spared versus their mother? Anything like that? Any kind of survivor's guilt you can relate a story to?
Yeah, personally, I felt a range, like I mentioned before, a range of emotions, including guilt, that I'm still here and she's
Mm-hmm.
not. And I think for me, I mostly felt the pain of her absence and the shame
Mm-hmm.
associated with her taking her own life. Those were like the major things that I felt. The absence, just in these life moments, the milestones that you think about, and having your peers, friends grow up with their moms, and you love that that's happening for them, and the same can be true, that you desperately miss that experience for
Mm-hmm.
yourself. But in terms of survivor's guilt, I haven't run across that too much in my, because this is kind of a newer flourishing coaching niche that we're kind of going into, where we're coaching people that have had mother loss. But
There's something you said that I don't want to leave undone about wasn't I good enough? Speak to that a little bit.
well, a mother's love is one of the most primal connections a person can have, right? When you think about that in terms of relationships and families, usually that bond with your mother is typically very strong and very nurturing. And it's not always in all cases, because we know there are different kinds of relationships. But the way I see it is, for me, I would love that. I would have loved to have that kind of relationship. And I often wondered, well, if she had lived and she was dealing with clinical depression, then how
Mm-hmm.
might that life be for
Right.
me and for my sisters while she was alive? Like, I don't know. There's a lot of unknowns, and the only one
Mm-hmm.
that knows is God. He understands and
Mm-hmm.
he is sovereign, thankfully. But yeah, you do think about that. You do think about, oh, am I enough? And how that plays out in your life. You
Mm-hmm.
become a people pleaser. You become very amiable. You want to get along. You're not very confrontational in your connections with people in general, because you want to be enough. You want to be enough. And what I had to realize is that my level of worth and value was not tied to her decision to
Yeah. Yeah.
complete a suicide. But that was a life lesson. It didn't happen overnight at all. It took some time to
Mm-hmm.
get there. But yeah, it's something that I think a lot of people, and I listen to the podcast that you have on at the ministry, and that comes up a lot for people. Say we compensate in different ways, whether it's working, like working a lot could be chief among them. I know for me, and I have to be careful with that. I have to make sure I'm being aware that, oh wait, do I need to do this work, or am I just pushing myself into this space because I want to be enough?
Danyetta, pour some wisdom into us. What we need to take away from all this conversation. What do we need to learn? How do we need to support others who are in this type of loss?
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about grief and how grief is a process. It's not a destination where we stay,
Okay.
but it's definitely a fluid process. And it does
Mm-hmm.
take time to grieve, and it might hit you when you least expect it. I think that was a question that came up, as you get older, how does it show up again? I think it's important to know that it will be a process and to raise our awareness around our own grieving process. I think that's so important, to be
Mm-hmm.
aware like, oh, I noticed that. I just had a grieving moment, or I'm in this process of grieving right now. Let me do this other thing to prepare and comfort myself.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can just get what you need when you are able to raise your level of awareness around grieving. You can get what you need more easily. So if you need time spent in solitude,
Mm-hmm.
not loneliness necessarily, you can find that solitude time. If you might find that journaling is helpful to you. I know for me, I adopted a writing discipline over the years, and it's really been so helpful for me to the point where I've been able to write books and, write an immersive project as well, just from just writing. If you need to spend time in prayer and stillness with God, you can seek that as well. And if you need
Right.
comfort, the comfort of being around your friends and loved ones, you can connect with others. But it's about knowing what you need as you're
Mm-hmm.
grieving.
Right. Right. I have to share one of the things that I have encountered with whenever we talk about writing and journaling, some people don't like to write. So what I have shared with them is if you have an iPhone, you have a voice memo app on your iPhone, and you can talk to yourself, record it, make sure you date it, dump it all out. I call this my barf journal. Dump it all out, just puke it all out, and then you can listen to it later. So there's no reason why you can't journal. If you're not a writer, you can journal in a different way by oral. And we do have another comment. As a motherless child whose mother is still alive, trying to navigate building a relationship now that I'm in my 60s, realizing that forgiveness is for me, not her.
That comment is beautiful because it's a revelation of your own awareness that you're in the driver's seat when it comes to how you forgive others and how your quality of life can be because you have practiced forgiveness. And it's not easy. It doesn't mean that
Mhm.
it's easy because you have all these things to
No,
forgive, right? But
yeah,
that's a powerful statement.
yeah.
Powerful.
There's a pastor that I listen to his podcast very often, and he said, it's like finding out that, there's a prisoner that's been released and it's you. And forgiveness, it releases you. You've been the prisoner. So it's a very deep and it's very profound to be able to look at forgiveness as a journey for yourself. Yeah. So let's wrap up your comments, your questions, and anything finally that you'd have to say.
What I want to say it towards the end, what I would say to someone who has lost a loved one to suicide or someone who doesn't quite understand what you've gone through. To a person who's lost a loved one to suicide, I would say it's not your fault. It's not your fault. And
Mm.
even if the circumstances were from a relational dispute, many people who complete a suicide are usually hurting so deeply, they believe this is the only way to relieve them of their pain. And I've even found out through reading books and sitting through seminars that women are more likely to hang themselves to
Yeah.
suffer more. Yeah, it's because they want the need to suffer even more. So it's a very,
Hmm.
very excruciating way to die. And like I said, it's an error in people's thinking. So, revealing that you lost a loved one to suicide is brave because you don't know how the other person will respond. But it sends a
Right.
clear message when someone is brave enough to share. It means that they want that person to know. And for me, when I share it, that signals that I want relationship, interested in relationship building. And if someone doesn't understand what you might be going through after losing someone to suicide, I would say give them space. You may also need that same space from them because you are already dealing with potentially a lot of confusion, disbelief, and sadness that follows as a
Mm.
survivor.
Okay. This has been wonderful. We have been so blessed by your words. You're amazing. You're amazing. And I just thank you so much for being willing to share your story, being willing to help whoever is in the audience. And there is one soul that you have touched so deeply. And I want to make sure people know how to reach you. It's Danyetta at motherlessdaughtersministry.com. And we'll wrap up tonight. I think we could talk lots and lots more, but really, really appreciate you blessing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ellen. And I'm really grateful for the Motherless Daughters Ministry to be able to share my story of mother loss by suicide. There isn't another place I can think of where I would feel more comfortable sharing. And so I want to say, if you've experienced mother loss by suicide, there's so much hope for you. And there is a capable community with those who have had similar life experiences here to support you as you navigate your own mother loss journey.
Well, I think that we'll wrap up, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary Ellen.
Thank you for joining us today for this very special interview. If you or someone you know has experienced mother loss by suicide, feel free to reach out to our ministry at www.motherlessdaughtersministry.com, or specifically to our guest author and coach, Danyetta Najoli, at Danyetta, Danyetta, at motherlessdaughtersministry.com. We hope you'll join us again for the next episode, and remember, you are not alone.